Welcome to Home Away from Home. I'm your host, Connor Donnelly. We have a very special guest with us here today, Jeremy Francis, who's going to talk to us about some camping gear. Now, if you're like me, the first thing you think about with camping is definitely like the trails and the great views that you have. But I think a lot of people forget that in order to make sure that you have a really good camping experience, you have to make sure that you have a really good night's sleep. So, Jeremy, why don't you talk about how good of a night of sleep I'm going to have with the setup that we got here?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me here. Like you say, if you don't have a good night's sleep, you're probably not going to be enjoying your trip very much, whether it's a single night or a week out on the trail.
Okay.
If you don't get that rest, you're having a bad time. Now, there's a number of different ways to address something like that. Now, let's for the sake of this discussion, just call that our shelter.
Okay.
A shelter can be almost anything. Anything from the clothing that we're wearing all the way to the RV that we're driving into the campground right there. You've got tents, you've got tarps, you've got hammocks, you've got all sorts of different things here. But let's look at something that's a little more mainstream.
Okay.
What we have set up right here is a pretty standard two-person backpacking tent. This model is the REI Half Dome 2.
Okay.
Now, when you get a number on the name of your tent, that generally tells you how many people that tent is designed for.
Half Dome 2?
Half Dome 2 is made to hold 2 people. Half Dome 3, 3 people, and so on. But if you're looking at this tent, you're probably noticing getting 2 people in there might be a little bit of a squeeze.
It does look like there's only enough space for sleeping 2 people in there.
Exactly. So that's kind of the name of the game in backpacking. Everything's pretty snug. Everything's a lot smaller than normal. So while you could put 2 people in here, could you put 2 people in here comfortably? Probably not.
I guess it depends on the people.
Exactly. Smaller people maybe. So what's very common in the outdoor industry is to take whatever that number is that they say the tent can hold and subtract 1 to get the actual comfortable number.
It's more like the maximum number of people.
Right. So something like this, yes, it's a 2-person tent, but this is going to be a really comfortable 1-person tent. And you take a 3-person tent, well, you could pretty comfortably put 2 people in there, and so on and so forth. Yes, you can stick to the limit, but if you reduce that a little bit, you've got a little more room to breathe.
Okay.
So even though this does look pretty small, I'm going to sit in here. I'm going to show this to you here. You can see that this is still pretty roomy. If I back up here, I'm sitting up straight. My head is not touching the top of this. I've got all this space out to the left and the right here. I've really got some living room in here.
Yeah, it looks like you could get around okay.
Now, there's a couple of features that make this possible. For one thing, this isn't just a 2-person tent. This is a 2-person plus tent.
All right.
And so what that means is this is deliberately oversized. It's a little longer, it's a little wider than a normal sized tent.
So bigger than the minimum size you would need for 2 people.
Correct. Now, with a normal non-plus tent, those are made for people that are about 6 feet. I'm about 6 feet. So if I were to lie down, I would find that my head and feet would be pressing up against the edges of this tent. But I have all this space to move around in here. So that's one way I know that
you could maybe even go diagonal if you wanted like a little bit more space.
I absolutely could. And if I didn't have someone to share this tent with, that'd be a great way to go. Another nice feature that a tent like this has is this bar going right across the top.
Oh yeah.
Your classic tent shape
It's a lot different than the super older tents where you had to like put the rods inside of the fabric.
You got it. That style is called a dome tent. And this is not a dome tent, even though it is called the Half Dome 2, which is a little confusing. When you have those pole structures that are just 2 poles, making an X going across, what you get is a tent that's wide at the bottom but comes to a point at the top. So you have very little headroom. You're going to be bumping up against the sides of the material. It's no fun.
It's a lot more
This-
space efficient, I guess.
Absolutely it is. This bar here, this is an optional piece that you see a lot of manufacturers making now. It's called a ridge pole, or sometimes
ridge
a
pole.
eyebrow pole.
An eyebrow pole, because it looks like an eyebrow?
A little bit, yeah. I'm not sure where they came up with that. But what it does is it shoves the walls of the tent out. So rather than getting this dome shape, this circle,
Oh, it gives you more side room.
you're getting a box. You get a boxy shape, exactly. It pulls those walls out from being a point out to an almost square, giving you a
Awesome.
huge increase in headspace, which means that you can move your arms around, you can stretch, you can pull your jacket over the top of your head, things like that. So very small change in the design for a huge effect. Very little weight change, very little price change for something like that.
Okay, so this is a little thin, though. I'm not sure if just this is going to protect me from the elements. Is this missing something? or-
Well, that's a good point there. Now, you might notice there's a lot of mesh in here, and if we move our hand in, you can see right through that. That's going to allow you, while you're sitting down in there, to see the stars at night, to see the sun going down on the horizon.
Yeah,
It's going to
that's one of my favorite things about camping is just the lack of light pollution. You can see all those beautiful stars.
Absolutely. And so a tent like this is going to allow you, as you're lying down there, to just look straight up and see all of that. But if you can see that, the rain can probably come in with
Yeah.
you. So you're right, we are missing a piece here. Most tents have an extra piece called a rain fly or a rain cover. What it is a big waterproof piece of fabric, usually the same color as the main color scheme. The color scheme on this one is orange, and so the rain cover is orange. And it stretches over the entire tent all the way down to the bottom and out to the side. Rather than that rain cover coming straight down to right here,
Okay.
it'll come out at about a 45-degree angle away from the door so that
So you
you're
have
left-
like this room here.
you get a big old covered porch.
Or
Exactly.
you can maybe like leave your shoes there or something.
Shoes, backpack, dog, all
Dog.
sorts of useful things. So that's a very nice thing to have. And in fact, you can put that on and still be able to see the stars. Most of those rain covers can be rolled up like a window shade when you're not using them.
Wow, that seems awesome.
So that's a nice feature there. Now, that'll cover you for things like rain and wind, but some people come in saying, I want a tent that'll protect me from the snow.
Snow tents.
This tent is a 3-season tent, meaning it's designed for spring, summer, and fall.
So you wouldn't bring this one snow camping with you?
Well, that's the funny thing. I would.
You would bring the snow camp.
The 4-season tents, the tents that are designed for ice and snow and mountaineering and things, they're not any warmer than a normal tent. They're not
Okay.
any more waterproof. In fact, they're less.
So what separates them?
They are stronger. They have more poles and they have more stakes and
So
attachment points.
it's taking up the weight of the snow.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay.
They're
So-
meant to handle all
Yeah.
that and wind.
Yeah, so it seems like this will protect me sufficiently well for all the camping that I would want to do. So what about the stuff inside? Am I going to be comfortable inside?
Well, we've got a bunch of fun options in here. So I've got this rigged up for a single person
Okay.
who might be on a backpacking trip over here. We've got 2 different types of pads, and the one that's in here is one that a lot of people like to start with. Now, I'd like to point out that we're just scratching the surface here. There are a lot of different types of pads that somebody might choose to use, and the one I'm going to show off here is just a very popular one. Let's reach in and
Okay.
pull this out. So this is a 6-foot-long inflatable air pad. This
Right.
rolls up nice and small when
Seems
it's
fairly
not in
comfy.
use. It's thick, it's warm, it's about half and half full of foam and air.
Okay.
When you squeeze all the air out of it, you're left with just the foam, and it's a lot smaller than this, so you can carry it around pretty easily.
So are there pads that are like no foam?
Absolutely. In fact, this guy lying right here has no foam, and a popular alternative to this type of pad will be one that has only air and no foam in it at all.
Okay.
Those can be made much thicker. This guy, as you can see right here, is less than 2 inches thick.
That's 1.75 inches, it says here.
1.75. That's not very much when it comes to this sort of thing when you think about how thick your mattress is at
Yeah.
home.
This is definitely a lot smaller than my mattress at home.
An air pad without foam in it can be getting closer to that thickness, sometimes as much as 4 or even 5 inches thick.
So when would you want to use the air mattresses with foam compared to the air mattresses without foam?
Well, foam is very warm. It's
Okay.
a wonderful insulating material. So if it's going to be cold out there, you're going out to sleep around Lake Tahoe in maybe the springtime, some of the snow hasn't melted yet.
Right.
It's still, t-shirt weather, but at night it's going to get chilly. A foam pad would be a great way to keep yourself from shivering
Yeah,
that whole
keep you
night
nice and
through.
insulated.
At the same time, though, the fact that it is an air pad means that it can pop. These
Oh.
are easy to break. The most common ways I see these break is someone sits down too hard on them and blows the seam out along the edge, which is pretty difficult to fix. Or you notice that the valve here is plastic. It's very common for someone to step on that and crush it.
Oh, and then it just doesn't hold any air anymore.
Correct, and that's almost impossible to fix. At that point, you pretty much got to replace it. Now, some of the companies that make pads like this are starting to make these made out of metal instead. Brass is a popular material, but it's still easy to break. So these are getting a little less popular these days. They're very comfortable.
Yeah, you don't want to be out on a long trek and then your pad gives out.
You sure don't. And so because that's something that's happened to me, I often go with the more mechanically reliable rig of just a regular old foam
So it
pad.
does seem a lot thinner than the air mattress one, though.
Much thinner. However, because there's no air in here, it doesn't compress the same way. So I still get a good bit of cushion and warmth out of something like this, but it's definitely not as comfy as something like that. Now, there's no air in there at all, so I need to pick a good flat material for this to be on.
So you're not sleeping on a whole bunch of rocks with that one?
I really try not to, but sometimes you don't have a choice. Now, it's going to be a little difficult to tell under this light, but if you pull in this area here, you can see that there's kind of a silvery sheen.
Oh,
I work this back and forth. This pad used to be covered in basically space blanket material, kind of that aluminized mylar. Now, I've used this so much that
it's kind that like is used to reflect heat?
Exactly right. A space blanket, you know, can reflect as much as 99% of your body heat back at you. This had a layer of that on there. So it might not have been the thickest and softest pad, but it was certainly warm. I've used it so much I've gone and worn all that stuff off. But pads like this, believe it or not, despite the look, can actually be some of your warmer options for a camping trip.
Compared to the air one that probably won't. It might be more comfy, but it probably won't retain the heat.
Correct. You start to run into a real issue when you get into, say, winter camping. Let's say that we were going to Yosemite in the wintertime. There's snow everywhere. The ground is frozen. And we want to stay warm. So we take our nice, warm air pads here. And we lay those down on the ground. And we're having a nice time. We're lying down on that. And midway through the night, we wake up just freezing cold. We're shivering. We shouldn't, because we've got a warm sleeping bag. We've got a warm sleeping pad. Why are we so cold? Well, here's a problem with air pads. No matter how warm that foam is inside, the air in there will cool down to the temperature of the ground. So it might be nice and warm inside my sleeping bag, but that ground is probably 30 degrees, and it's going to pull all the heat out of that air. And then the pad is 30 degrees, and now it's starting to pull the heat out of my sleeping bag and then out of me. So this doesn't work very well for winter camping trips. This is a wonderful option for winter camping because it is
no air in there.
No air at all, completely insulated. So you lie down on this, there's not going to be any heat transfer there, or no appreciable amount. So a common way to do winter camping is to put one of these on the ground, let it cool down like that, and put this on top of it. Now you've got that nice,
both worlds.
Exactly. You got that nice soft pad from the Trekker underneath, and you've got that insulating effect from the foam pad.
So you have the comfort and the heat.
It just means you're bringing twice as much stuff. But if it's a matter of being cold and not being cold, I'm happy to bring some extra equipment along.
So why don't you talk to me about the sleeping bag that we have in there?
Absolutely. So let's take a look at what we've got in here. So I've already said the phrase 3-season when I was talking about the tent. This is a 3-season tent. This is a 3-season sleeping bag. Exactly right. Basically anything but winter. This sleeping bag is designed for the temperatures that you would run into in most places in the spring, the summer, and the fall. This particular bag here is a goose down bag, and you can get a good idea of...
With real goose feathers.
Real goose feathers. Though that's getting to be kind of hard to find these days since duck factories do it a lot better.
Duck factories? Do they make ducks there?
Well, they make all sorts of things there. Now, if we pull up this label here, you can see the name of the sleeping bag, and you can see that the temperature rating, which in this case is 20 degrees.
So 20 degrees does seem pretty warm, and this sleeping bag does seem pretty comfy. So I think I am going to be pretty warm and comfy when I'm sleeping out on my camping trips. But I think another super important thing that maybe I think is at least in the top 5 things that people think about when they're camping is how full am I going to be? How's the food in my stomach going to be? So let's take a look at some of our camping supplies.
All right.
Our cooking supplies, sorry. Our cooking camping supplies, I guess, if you want to put it that way. So we have a lot of different items here that we can talk about, but I think the main thing that definitely catches my eye is that giant set of equipment over there. Why don't you talk to me about that?
Okay, well, I've got a number of different stoves here. Some are small, some are big, some are kind of variety of things. This is probably the most complete system here because this is both a stove and this entire system. It's the frying pan, it is this big old pot that sits right here. This all comes together. So this is a great big kit.
It's kind of like my burners at home.
It's pretty darn convenient. Now, if we pop this thing open here, you can see exactly. This is designed to be as much like a stove system that we would have at home as possible. This model is called the Jetboil Genesis Base Camp System.
That sounds intense.
Good strong name. This is trying to get into that same kind of industry that that those old Coleman 2-burner propane
I remember
stoves.
from my camping trips, like the really big ones, but that one's like way smaller.
Much smaller, and it folds up just like this. So you've got the same amount of heat that you would have out of one of those or out of your stove at home, something that's easy to use, easy temperature controls, push button activation, real easy stuff. But check this out. Feel that and tell me what you notice about it.
This is probably something I wouldn't want to put in my backpack to carry around for 10 to 20 miles, I'll tell you that.
That's closing in on 10 pounds. That is an awful lot for a single stove. Even if you're cooking for a big group, that's too much. So if you're car camping, if you're doing something where you're doing
going out with the family, maybe
going out with the family, trying to cook something fancy on the trip, maybe you're cooking for a bunch of hungry climbers down in Joshua Tree, something like that. This is a really good way to go.
I can definitely put all my eggs and bacon in that thing.
All kinds of stuff in here. I mean, look at the size of the pot that it comes with. You've got some real good options here. But if you're going any more than a couple of miles, this is not a good choice. So good.
So maybe if you have like a base camp that you're hiking out of.
Absolutely. Good for base camp cooking.
Okay, so if we're trying to see more efficient alternatives, we're going to do like long backpacking treks. I think this one looks a lot more efficient than that one. What is this?
Well, that is the same company. That is also Jetboil, and that's the other side of this same coin. If this is your great big, easy to use, just like at home cooking system, that is the small, light, fast, efficient, but maybe a little bit harder to use system. That is the Jetboil Minimo.
So I probably wouldn't be cooking a steak up in here.
It's going to be difficult to do fancy cooking in this. This is a very specific use item, but that one specific use, it is very good at. In fact, it is the best at it, and that one use is boiling water. This is the best stove for boiling water very, very quickly.
What makes it greater compared to this like normal tin pan?
Well, the Jetboil system here, and this is generation 3 now, so the older versions of the stove looked a little different, but still had one feature that was the same. The Jetboil stoves are what's called an integrated stove system. It is both the stove and the pot combined. So if you grab the top of that and give it a twist, you'll find that the two pieces come apart.
Oh, so I have the pot here and I have the stove here.
Exactly right. Now the stove is no different from any of these others. Just like this stove, just like that stove, it is simply a little blowtorch design. The key is the underside of that Jetboil pot. All this stuff welded onto the bottom in here, that is called the flux ring system. It's a series of heat exchangers that capture the heat that would be lost.
Is that similar to the flux capacitor?
Well, it is spelled the same way, but it's not quite as fancy as a flux capacitor. Instead, what this does is it cooks your food a lot faster rather than letting you travel through time, which in a way might be
that's a form of time travel.
Time travel. It saves you some time. So that series of fins in there does two things. It blocks the wind so that your food cooks faster, and it captures the heat that you would normally lose out the side, causing your food to cook faster. So that's a wonderful system. And because this is also a Jetboil rig, if we look at the underside of this pot,
also has the flux rings on it.
It sure does. If we turn this sideways, you can see those fins right in through that lower section. So it's just a giant version of that very same system. Now, is it really needed on something as big as that? Probably not, but it is nice to have the option. So that's two versions of the same thing. But unfortunately, while that is very, very good at boiling water very quickly, like you said, with the steak, with any food that's not a liquid, this is going to be very difficult to cook.
So this is mainly for only boiling water.
It can do other things, but not very well. It specializes.
So what if we wanted to
water.
go on a backpacking trip, but I wanted to do more than just eat maybe freeze-dried food?
Well, we've looked at kind of the two opposite ends right now. The Jetboil is great at boiling water, but not much else. The Genesis over here is great at doing fancy food, but it's just too big and heavy. So we want something midway, and that's going to be this guy right here in the middle. If we pop this pot off of here, this stove system right here is the MSR Wind Pro.
Wind Pro.
This is called a remote stove system. What that means is the burner and the fuel tank are separate. They're just connected by
Unlike the Jetboil, which is all one item.
All one item. As you can imagine, without those little feet down there, that starts to get a little unstable. This system is very stable. So this guy right here is
like uneven camping ground.
Right. So we've got this little folding system right here. It can be made very, very small. You pop these parts open, and you set it down onto some sort of surface. In this case, we'll pop it down right there. The beauty of the remote system here is now I can take something huge like this and not worry about it collapsing the fitting on the fuel tank there. The Wind Pro system is wonderful because it's got very good temperature control. It's a big burner like what we have on this guy over here.
But this seems something I would much rather take on a backpacking trip than that one.
Heck of a lot lighter, just as hot, just as easy to use, just a real delight. So if you wanted to do something more than boiling water, it'll still boil water.
So this is where I can bring my steaks if I wanted to.
Bring some steaks, that'll cook them up just fine. Pancakes, stir fry, any of that sort of thing. So you can get as fancy as you like without much extra weight. So that's a nice one. The only downside is because it's not an integrated system like the Jetboil, you have to bring a pot or a pan or something to go with it.
So a little bit heavier, but I don't know. Would the trade-off be worth it though?
Well, that's entirely going to depend on you. You hear about these ultralight backpacker types who get out there and they bring nothing but a 10-pound bag of oatmeal for 6 months.
Cutting parts of the handles off of their toothbrushes and stuff.
Cutting the edges of their maps off. I mean, you know, you can take lightweight to an extreme, but personally, eating well on a camping trip is one of my favorite parts. So I will happily bring a little extra weight in a cooking system, in a food stuff, if it lets me eat.
I think I might agree with you on that one, because I know it's hard to have a good time if you're hungry or not eating like food that you think is really good. But we do have freeze-dried food options here, so why don't you take a look at this real fast, which is food that you can, I assume you can eat with your Jetboil?
Absolutely. In fact, the Jetboil was designed with these types of meals was designed with that in mind. The idea of any of these freeze-dried type meals is that you boil up a certain amount of water, you rip the top of the bag off, you pour the boiling water into the bag, and you seal it back up. You actually cook it inside that bag.
Okay.
If you don't want to do that, you could pour it into a pot like this and you could simmer it to get it going, but it's a nice lightweight way to get a lot of nutrients, a lot of calories out in the wild. Now, you're going to have to look pretty hard to find somebody who says that their favorite kind of food is freeze-dried food. Yeah. It's gotten better than it was 10 or 20 years ago, but it's still freeze-dried food. So you've definitely got some pros and cons that go along with something like that. But if you want something that is easy to make, pouring a couple of ounces of hot water into a bag and letting it sit for 10 minutes is about as easy as
it looks like
this
one's called Pad See with chicken, and it's got a rice noodle dish with garlic, soy sauce, broccoli, and chicken.
So that is more than just ramen out there.
Yeah, that is a lot of different ingredients.
You've got an actual meal in there. And so if you want something that's got that flavor, that's a wonderful way to go. But many people choose to bring their own ingredients instead. You can go to any supermarket that has a dry bulk goods aisle, Safeway, Whole Foods, Winco, any of those areas that have the big old bins of nuts and oatmeals and lentils and beans, things like that. You can put together a pretty solid meal like one of those for a lot less money and something that is a little bit more convenient. But while we're talking about food, I think it's also important to know how to store your food.
Oh yeah, you don't want like raccoons or bears getting at your stuff.
Exactly. If you're in an area that deals with people a lot, like say Yosemite National Park,
definitely squirrels, or as they call them in Philmont, mini bears.
Mini bears. You know, you get a lot of materials that are designed to protect your food from animals, and they're often called bear this, bear that, a bear bag, a bear can, a bear canister, things like that. But despite that name, they're really designed more to deal with the issues of squirrels and rodents, raccoons. They're much more of a problem than bears. So an example of something like that would be this guy right here.
Okay.
This is a bear vault.
Bear vault.
It looks fancy, but really all it is a glorified Tylenol bottle. This is a great big smooth plastic jar.
Yeah.
It's got a lid up on top that's got a child-safe lid. try to open that up and it won't go.
I'm not sure a raccoon's getting in there anytime soon.
No, not for this system right here. It's got a little child-safe tab, and you've got to push it in with your fingernail, or if you don't have enough fingernails, you can hit it with a little rock or a stick. You get a bit of twist, and there's a backup tab. So you hit that one, and then off the lid comes. And inside here, you've got all your smellable items, not just food like that, but chapstick, toothpaste, deodorant, any kind of thing that has a smell. I've seen a bear slurp down an entire tube of ointment. They don't know that that's not food. So you put all your smellable stuff in something like this, put that jar on, and you make sure that it clicks. There's the one click, there's the two click, and now that's good to go. You put it somewhere safe, and you're in good shape.
So that seems like some pretty awesome cooking stuff, and now we know where to keep our food. What about this tube system here? What is this?
Well, all the stoves in the world aren't going to do you very much good if your water's contaminated. Now, it is important to point out that if your water is going to boil at any point, you actually don't need to filter it. But it's a good idea to do that anyway.
Especially for drinking water.
Absolutely. If it's drinking water, you're probably not boiling it first, and you want something like that. That is the Katadyn Hiker Pro. That is a mechanical pump filter. You take this little black bit that you're holding now, throw it into a body of water, a stream, a lake, whatever you like. You'd take this other clean end here, you'd stick it into your water bottle or maybe into your pot over here, and you just start pumping that lever. And it takes a few pumps to get it primed, but once it gets going, it starts drawing dirty water up the contaminated hose, runs it through this filter here that's got all kinds of good stuff for making water safe, and spits it out the clean tube, giving you good, clean drinking water.
So how would you compare this method of water filtration to like some of the other ones? Because I know I've heard of like people using like tablets or something. So how would you compare it to that?
This is an older way of doing things. You don't see a lot of people using these anymore. Tablets and smaller hollow fiber style filters that can be installed in line in your Camelback system or your water bottle are getting a lot more popular now.
Awesome. So wow, that seems like a really nice way to keep all of my stuff nice and clean. Seems like my food's going to be prepared adequately. I'm going to have a lot of food in my tummy. My food's going to be safe. Rodents aren't going to steal it. So if you had, if you had to give, let's say, one piece of advice to people who are going out camping for the very first time.
For the very first time, make it easy to bail out. If you're going to go and try something with all this new equipment and all these unusual things to do in this new place, there are a lot of things that can go wrong in something like that. So, and especially if you're bringing your family or something, make sure that if you brought the wrong fuel for the stove, if you can't get it lit, if it's pouring down rain, something like that, that you don't have to go home and defeat.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't want to, if there was the first time camping, I wouldn't go like 25 miles onto the backcountry. This has been Home Away from Home. I've been your host, Connor Donnelly. Thank you so much for joining me, Jeremy, and I hope to see you guys all out on the trails.